Hey guys, it's Comfort here, and I just wanted to make a video about how I made my mix for the Forest Boys show that we had yesterday. And I just wanted to make a video to kind of document how I make my mixes. I'm not a skilled DJ, really, but people seem to like my mix, and I just wanted to share about how I go about making mixes. And so the first thing I do is I dig, and I just go on SoundCloud, and I spend a lot of time just going through music, my likes, and I make a playlist, a private playlist, and I just add a ton of music to it. Just like lots of stuff I've been listening to. And the goal here is just to try to get a lot of raw material. My kind of key point here that I want to make from my experience is that it's way better to have a lot more songs when you're trying to make the mix than to have too few. And so my rule of thumb is that I try to have about twice as long, I try to have twice as long of raw content than my mixes. For example, if I'm doing a 30-minute set, I would want to have an hour of raw material, and that's just adding up all of the individual track times of my music, of the music that's in this playlist. And you can do this easily in iTunes. If you make a playlist in iTunes, it'll show you the total length if you just add up all the songs. And the idea there is that you're probably not going to play the whole song of each song. You're probably only going to play like a minute or two, and so it's so you want to have just way more material than you think you'll need, because it really just sucks to be making your mix and then you just run out of material. It's way better to have too much, and cut stuff out and maybe not include tracks in the mix, than to run out. And so that's the first step. I just dig and find a ton of raw material. I don't really care about. I'm not thinking at this point about whether songs are going to match well. I'm just picking songs that I really love and want to share with my friends and with everyone, basically. So the next step after digging and getting a huge playlist is downloading them using a SoundCloud downloader, and then going into Rekordbox. So if you guys aren't familiar with Rekordbox, it's a program. People generally use it to prepare your USB for plugging into like the CDJs at a club or something, because that's where you load your songs onto the USB, and this is the program you use to do it. But I'm not sure if people also know that you can actually use it for experimenting and prototyping with transitions, and this is really the core of where I plan my mix. I think that basically, this is where you should be spending the majority of your time, because it's just so easy to experiment with transitions here and seeing which songs match well. And so this is where you take your full list of unordered songs and you start to make some order. You start to get a sense of which songs pair well together, which songs are in the same key, similar BPM, and this is where you can really start to make a more concrete ordering of what your set list is going to be. And so basically you load your songs into here, you run the BPM analysis, you run the tempo analysis, you make sure to set your grid just right on the songs. I won't cover that now, there's like tons of other videos on it, but you get your songs all nice and loaded up into Rekordbox, all analyzed. You set your cue points, your memory cues for kind of the key transition points. I usually put them at like the main first drop, and then maybe some at certain points kind of leading into that at even intervals, like on the eighth, like on the every 8 measures or something, because those are usually pretty even points where like melodies and loops start to come in. And basically, this is where you do your prototyping. And the reason why it's so good is because Rekordbox has it has this great beat sync and automatic kind of like beat matching thing, which makes it super easy to just play around with transitioning songs and mixing songs into one another, even if they're not in the same BPM exactly. It's way harder to do that kind of prototyping in Ableton, because you need to like warp tracks and stuff. It's just so much easier to do this in Rekordbox. And so here's an example. So here's a rough version of the set list I made for the set. And you can also sort by key and sort by BPM, and this is really essential. Sorting by key just makes it so easy to see which songs could potentially be a really great fit together. And yeah, so basically the idea is you want to take your songs, analyze them, sort by key, sort by BPM, and find songs that are in a similar key and in a similar BPM. And so, for example, for my case, I noticed that this Just Connor track and my blade flip are, so reorder it, Just Connor and my blade flip are in adjacent keys, 2A and 2B, and they're basically in the same BPM, just 7 BPM away from each other. And so here's how I would go about experimenting to see how well they mix together. I load them up into the 2 decks in Rekordbox, and Rekordbox basically kind of gives you keyboard shortcuts that let you kind of emulate what it's like to be on CDJs. And so you get a Q button, right? And so you get a Q button, which lets you do a Q like a CDJ. And so here's I just play the first song, and then I get my entry point for the second one lined up. In this case, I'm planning to kind of enter in and just on the main drop of the blade flip and just see how the 2 tracks blend with each other, because their key is similar, so it should be good. Also, very important, I have beat sync enabled, and this is what is going to automatically make my blade flip 120 BPM, even though it's 127. The beat sync, because I loaded it in the second, like after the first track, and the Just Connor one is set to master, so this one is going to match with it at 120. And so anyway, we'll play the first one. And the drop is coming. And so we can see Rekordbox has perfectly lined them up in the grid, the BPMs, and they actually go pretty well together. We can use... So I'm going to try that one more time, because the Just Connor track has a bit of interesting timing, which makes it eventually kind of misalign with the other one, not in terms of BPM, but in terms of the way it groups its measures. And so one more time, we'll just do this. And now you have this slider, and you can slide between. So that's just... Anyway, that's how you do it. That's how I do it. That's how you experiment and see, do they go well together, and adjust the volume. You don't get fancy stuff like filters, at least in this kind of free version. But you do get that volume slider, and that's kind of all. That's all I need to really just get a sense if they're going to go well together. And you basically just do this a lot. You just go through your list, you find all the ones that seem like they could be good candidates. You test them out with this kind of mix, and eventually you start to get a rough ordering. You know, you pair things together. You're like, okay, these 2 tracks go all together. These 2 go together. This third one, you know, trails at the end of those 2 really nicely. So I have 3 here, and then I just need to find some way to transition these 2 into these 3. And so that's how I kind of go about building it up. And eventually, before you know it, you just have these large streams of songs that go all together. And before you know it, you're at 30 minutes or 45 minutes of music. So that's how I use Rekordbox to prototype and do the majority of my planning. This is where I spend most of my time, because again, it really sucks to do that in Ableton. It's just so much more intuitive to do that here. And so after you have your set basically fully planned and designed, then I go to the final step, which is going into Ableton and actually implementing it and executing it in the mix. I don't have DJ equipment, and so I don't like record the mix live. But I think, and so I use Ableton. I'm really familiar with Ableton, and I take more of a producer's approach to making my mix, and I think that's totally fine. It's totally fine. You can make great sounding mixes. Like, some people might call you like a fake DJ or whatever, but whatever, you can still make an awesome mix. And so here's Ableton. Here's how I do this in Ableton. Here's how it looks. I make one Ableton track for every single song I'm going to play, which is how I like to approach it. You might also opt for just 2 tracks and flipping back and forth between the 2 tracks, whatever you prefer. A few important things here are I warp every single song onto the grid. Every single track is warped, and this means I need to use tempo automation whenever I want to change the tempo. But I find that this is how this allows you to get really nice, like perfect transitions, basically, like literally perfect transitions, which really appeal to me and sound good to me. And so I warp every single track. I automate the tempo the entirety of the mix, and I just lay out the tracks exactly as I prototyped them in Rekordbox. And that said, there is room for additional experimentation and stuff here, and you can continue to kind of refine it and really play with it. So what I mean by that is, for example, so one pair of tracks that I noticed went pretty well together back in Rekordbox is this track Archetype by Visage and Serenity by Shin and Sync. The problem with these tracks is that the BPMs are super different, and so if we sort by key, actually they might not even actually be in a similar key. Actually, no, yeah, they're Archetype and Serenity. So they're both 6A and 6B, but they're like 50 BPM apart from each other. And so if we tried to mix this, it just doesn't sound good. I'll show you. So here's Archetype loaded in the first deck, Serenity in the second one. And so basically, anyway, so we're going to set Archetype as the master, and then Serenity is going to be beat synced. And let's just see. Oops, I messed that up. Let me try that one more time. Okay. So that's Visage. And this is Serenity. So, like, it's just so slow. Serenity is just slowed down 50 BPM, and it is really noticeable at that point and doesn't sound great. And so these 2 tracks are not super appropriate to like mix directly into one another. I mean, it could be done, but it would involve a pretty radical like tempo switch up in the mix. And so what I decided to do is I noticed though that there's this break part of the Shin track, which is really beautiful. I'll play it at the normal tempo. It's just that vocal. It's gorgeous, and that wouldn't sound that bad if it was slowed down a lot. And so what I decided to do is I decided that I wanted to have these 2 tracks mashed up in some way. And so what I did is I just I placed that vocal part right in the intro of Archetype as kind of a layering on before the drop. And so this is what it sounded like. Okay, so oops, I missed it. Oh, sorry. I messed up my beat sync. Okay. So Archetype back at 108. Serenity beat synced. Okay. Okay, let's try this one more time. And then we go completely into archetype, and we just basically kind of cut out with sync. But basically, it's just a way to include that cool little mashup, because that's what like I think DJing is about. It's like you want to pick great songs and also make something interesting, like make an interesting new experience that people haven't really heard before by combining songs in interesting ways. And so I think this is a cool opportunity to not pass up to mix these songs. And so here's how, so in Ableton, I did it just by putting the Serenity right next to archetype. And the kind of interesting thing is that these songs don't occur in the mix near each other at all. Archetype is the second song. It's really slow. Serenity comes in very close to the end. It's like the last. It's like one of the last. Yeah, it's right here. It's like the fifth to last song in the 45-minute mix, and so they are like nowhere near each other in the mix. But I still think that's actually really cool because the listener gets kind of like a hint of this vocal melody on the second song, and it just kind of goes away, and then way later it comes back again. And I think that's so interesting and makes the mix so much more, interesting than just kind of track being played after track. It adds this kind of interconnectedness that I think is really cool. And this is something I learned from watching this Sticky Buds DJ tutorial, which I'll link. But he talks about reusing acapellas and sampling bits of tracks into the neighboring tracks and just getting really creative with it. So anyway, that's how I get to play this. So you can see that, the vocal cuts out, but actually this is super subtle, but I added a delay onto the vocal melody. So it comes in again, and see if you can hear it if you listen back again. It's very subtle. I have no idea if you'll be able to hear this because I wasn't able to get the audio recording really working, so I just have to record it from my mic. But that's an example of doing something a bit creative, which I think works really well. And I'll just go through some of the other interesting transitions, like my favorite transitions in this. And so, again, I found all of these just by playing around in Rekordbox. But again, so here is Wildflower mixing in with Jaded by Vicene. And so the verse begins, and then the intro of Jaded starts. The verse keeps going. So I'm automating the gain way down of the vocal, but I don't cut it out. And in fact, it stays there for a long time. It just keeps going in the background, just at a lower volume. So now Jaded is in the foreground, but that vocal of Wildflower keeps going in the background because I really like how they mix together. And I just ride that out for a long time. So the general idea is that you don't need to make your mix just track after track. You can really just kind of, if you can find a really great pair, you can just mash them up together and ride them out for a long time and play with the volume and maybe filters and stuff to make room from one or the other and prefer the listener to hear one or the other. But yeah, so that's an example. Here is this Comfort ID mixing in with my Shoreline Mafia flip. And so I'm looping this intro vocal. And so I'm basically just like looping the first like 16 bars or whatever, 8 bars of the Shoreline Mafia flip with that intro vocal, just to kind of prep the listener, and then eventually it just smoothly transitions. And then it fully transitions. And yeah, keep in mind that I'm automating the tempo this entire time. Every single song, I have to add a few tempo automations to get it to the correct tempo, because the tracks are all warped onto the grid. So moving on. So here's one of my other favorite parts. Shoreline Mafia mixing into Just Connor, stacked up with my blade flip, which we showed early in Rekordbox, and the blade flip actually comes in later, but we just include it in with Just Connor, and then it comes out, and then later it just goes into the full blade flip. But look at this. Okay, cool. We heard that before, and then I also found that this King Dimitri ID mixes really well with Just Connor, and so the blade drops out, King Dimitri swaps in, but Just Connor is still playing the whole time. So Just Connor is still there, but then King is coming in. And I'm filtering out Just Connor. So I have a filter on that track, and it filters away all the low end, because King has that amazing like hard 808 in his track. So yeah. But then Just Connor keeps going, and eventually it comes back, and I find that so these drums are from Just Connor, but I really like how they pair with King Dimitri's mix. So anyway, yeah, so that's that. And then probably, I mean, you're getting the idea, right? It's just like you find your good transitions, and then you really get creative with matching them up, like pretty aggressively, where you like just don't remove tracks and really just have tracks staying together for a very long time, which I think is really great for the listener and sounds really good. Probably my favorite one, which is this gloomy comfort mashup, where basically the songs just stay together almost the entire time, but I loop this gloomy section for super long, and so the gloomy one starts. The gloomy's out here. Gloomy rides out for a bit, and then eventually the comfort comes in. Gloomy mixed with comfort. Comfort's EQ'd in to let the bass cut out all the bass with maybe some reverb also. So the focus is still mostly on Gloomy. I'll be right back. I'm just gonna get my power cable. I'll be right back. Alright. So yeah, so now we were mixing in comfort with Gloomy. So Gloomy is still the primary focus right now. At least up until that point. And then, so I was looping, yeah. So I actually looped this like a few times. And then eventually, when it was ready, it goes into the afterburn drop, and Gloomy starts to fade out. Yeah, I love how these songs go together. So yeah, the Gloomy song naturally fades out right now, and that might even be the end of the song. But then I just I just chop out that last part and just keep looping it. And you'd be able to do this on CDJs also. There's no reason you couldn't do that, but I just do it. It's just very easy to do in Ableton. But basically, the focus shifts. The gloomy drops out, and Afterburn takes the main focus. But that gloomy vocal stays there and just chimes in like every 8 bars, which I really liked. Like that little. And so even during like this really kind of like low, yeah, especially during this super low, like filtered out section, like break section of Afterburn, we have that gloomy still going there. And then this is probably one of my favorite moments of the entire mix. But Afterburn, you know, comes out of the break, keeps riding, and at this key moment, we just bring back basically the full gloomy drop, except that it's like EQ'd and stuff to not, because the focus at this point is still on Afterburn. But we bring back that nice gloomy drop. So it's all filtered out and stuff, and it's way faster because we sped it up to. Because Afterburn is actually a bit faster than Afterburn is much faster than Gloomy. Gloomy's 141, Afterburn's like 150 or more. But anyway, we just bring it back in, and then yeah, then we kind of just write it out from there. Afterburn ends, and the Afterburn. Still have that gloomy vocal there. So yeah, I think that's definitely one of my favorite transitions. It's not even a transition, it's kind of like a mashup, to be honest, because it's just the two tracks are just so together the whole time. And I think that is kind of the last, you know, other than there's not too much more to talk about. So yeah, hope that was interesting. This is how I go about the whole process of making my mix, where I do a lot of digging, get twice as much material, go into Rekordbox for 80% of the time, plan out the mix, play around with the transitions, find like the greatest ones, but basically plan out the entire mix there. Then at the end, hop into Ableton and just execute. And it's really fun when you know exactly what's going to sound good already. So yeah, those key takeaways are: get way more material than you need. Prototype in Rekordbox, not in Ableton, and get super creative with it. And don't be afraid to sample tracks into other tracks, even if they're not yet at all close in the mix. And yeah, like really aggressively mix things together, and like don't fade out tracks, just have them lower and just keep riding. Because if you find really great mashups and tracks that pair together, you can totally just let them ride. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Nothing else to say. Thanks a lot for watching.